Hey guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and in this video I'm going to be sharing how I built this grape arbor. Now this is a really simple project, but it's just part of my entire fenced garden that you can kind of see a little bit of here. I don't want to give the whole thing away because I'll be sharing how I built the rest of this space in the next video, so be sure to subscribe and stay tuned if you want to check it out. But for this video, I'm going to focus on how I built the grape arbor, which is actually a really simple project. So if you're ready to dive in and get building, let's go. I've been wanting to build a nice fenced garden for a while now, and this spring I finally tackled it. It was definitely a ton of work, but it looks a million times better than whatever this was that we had going on here last year. I'm going to share the entire fenced garden build with you in the next video, but one of the foundational elements of the whole garden was the grape arbors. These arbors can stand alone as their own project if you didn't need an entire garden fence, so I thought that it would be fitting to make them their own video. These were incredibly simple to build and super easy to customize. I'm sharing the full printable plans in the video description if you'd like to build one of your own. For these arbors, I opted for cedar. Cedar is pretty pricey, but I didn't really want to use treated wood since our grapevines will be growing up and around them. Honestly, I'm not really sure that it matters, but anyway. For the arbor, I used 4x4 posts for the corners, so I cut 4 to the height I wanted these to be. Then I cut down 2x4s for the framing to go between them. First, I assembled the two sides. Each side consists of 2 4x4 posts and 2 2x4s to go between them, one at the top and one kind of towards the middle. I assembled these using pocket holes and screws. When using pocket holes for outdoor projects, make sure to use the outdoor rated pocket hole screws. There's several options, but I usually like to use the blue coat ones so I don't get them mixed up. I installed the bottom 2x4 1.5 inches up from the bottom of the 4x4 and ran it vertically like you see here. But for the middle, I turned these and ran them horizontally instead. Once one side was together, I repeated to make the other side of the arbor. Then I cut a piece of 2x4 to run along the top. I wasn't really sure how long that I wanted to make these so that it looked right, but 60 inches seemed to work pretty well. So I cut one for the front and one for the back. To give them a little more detail, I used a paint can to draw a curve along the bottom corners of both 2x4s. Then I just used a jigsaw to cut these out. This was the most difficult part, trying to attach these pieces evenly and keep everything square in the process. I'm not sure that this was the best way to do it, but this is what I did. I laid these down and spaced the sides 36 inches apart. I used a speed square to help me keep the 2x4 square to the post while I screwed it in place. For these pieces, I secured them with these black timber screws. I will link them in the video description, but you could use regular outdoor wood screws here. I just like the black accents on the front. I attached one 2x4 on the front side, then flipped it over and did the same for the other side. Now it's important to keep everything square and to keep the sides evenly spaced at the top and bottom for each side. I was constantly checking my spacing before driving any screws. Once this frame was together, I flipped it back upright and cut 2 pieces of 2x4 to run between the pieces that I just attached. I just secured these to the 4x4 post at the top using 2.5 inch decking screws. The pieces across the top and then the framing on the inside on each side of the trellis along the bottom, it's all made out of 2x2s. So I've got these cedar 2x4s and I'm gonna rip them in half just to make basically 2x2. They're not actually 2x2s because I'm not gonna measure 1.5 by 1.5. I'm just gonna rip them down the middle. I'm gonna rip these down on my bandsaw. I could definitely use a table saw. Either way would work fine. Where I'm located, cedar options are pretty limited without having to order it. So basically, my cedar options were 4x4s and 2x4s. So if I needed anything different, I was going to have to cut them myself. So to make my 2x2s, I just ripped my cedar 2x4 offcuts down the middle, and that made kind of slightly oversized 2x2s. I could trim these down to exactly 1.5 by 1.5, but I just left them as is. Some of these pieces will go along the top and some will line the sides. So let's line the sides first. I cut 2x2 pieces to fit around the bottom open section of each side panel of the arbor. I just screwed these in with more 2.5-inch decking screws. Now, the purpose of these pieces is just to give me somewhere to staple the fencing wire to next. When I get this in place, we're going to be fencing in the whole garden area. And I'm going to be using this for the fencing. So I want the trellis to kind of match so it looks like it fits in and it was like intentionally done that way. I know it's obviously not the prettiest and most decorative option, but I think overall, for the overall project, this is probably the best solution. So I'm just going to take some cutters and cut this to fit this opening on each side. If you were building this as a standalone piece and you wanted something a little nicer, lattice paneling would work perfect here. It comes in a 4x8 sheet and you can cut these to size to fit your project. Or if you wanted to get creative with some cedar scrap strips and create your own trellis design here, go for it. I'm stapling these on the outside of the trellis because we're going to walk through the inside of the trellis. I'm going to put some gates on here. This outside piece is going to be on the inside of the fence, so it's going to be less noticeable, so that's why I'm putting this on the outside. And I've got a stapler here. I'm just going to staple this in place. Keep in mind, it really just depends on what you're using this for, whether it's decoration or for growing. If you're using it for growing, you want to make sure to use something sturdy enough to hold the weight of whatever is growing on it. I work my way around, cutting and stapling these wire fence pieces along both sides of the arbor, and then the final pieces were these 2x2s that go along the top. I evenly space these out along the top 2x4 supports, making sure to leave even overhang on the front and the back. Then I use 2.5-inch decking screws again to secure them. At this point, the arbor is complete and you can finish however you'd like. An outdoor stain and/or sealant will help keep the cedar from turning gray from the weather so quickly, but I'm not going to finish mine until I get my entire garden finished so that I can stain it all at once. For now, I drug these arbors down to the garden and tried to move a little dirt around to get them level. I suggest anchoring these to the ground or a surrounding object to prevent tipping over. As an example, you could anchor them to your raised garden beds, to a fencing system like I'll be doing in the next video, or you can anchor them to the ground and they can stand on their own. It really just depends on how you plan to use it. I absolutely cannot wait to share the rest of the garden project soon, but for now, that wraps up the arbor build. I told you it was so simple. These will give our grapevines something much nicer to grow on than what we had for them last year. I hope you enjoyed watching them come together, and I hope you'll stick around for the next video to see the rest of the space. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!